Imagine the pale shimmer of dawn spreading across a battlefield, mist curling low, the air heavy with silence that waits to break. Out of that veil of silver light, the sound begins. Hooves, countless hooves. A thunder, not from gods, but from women. They ride with their hair bound tight, faces streaked with dust, eyes fixed forward, bows drawn, spears ready. To the Greeks watching from the hills, they must have seemed like a mirage, something too strange to belong to the order of their world. Women, armed and unflinching, striking with precision. To them, these were the Amazons, warrior women from beyond the boundaries of civilization, beyond the edges of the maps they could name. The Greeks told stories to explain them, because how else could they? These riders appeared in tales again and again, fighting Heracles, defying Theseus, dying at the walls of Troy. Every retelling described them as both feared and desired, monsters and muses all at once. They stood for something the Greek mind couldn't easily reconcile, the inversion of order. Men ruled, women obeyed. That was how it should be, or so the philosophers wrote. Yet the Amazons rode against that rule as if it were wind and nothing more. They were freedom given form, a mirror held up to a world built on control. To the Greeks, they were antithesis. In the amphora paintings that survive, warriors in polished bronze face women in patterned tunics and pointed caps, curved bows drawn. The contrast itself was a statement. Civilization versus wildness, logic versus chaos. But the line blurs when you look closely. Because the Greeks didn't paint the Amazons as grotesque, they painted them as equals. Their arms are steady, their eyes determined. If they were chaos, it was the kind that demanded respect. Perhaps that's why poets called them the daughters of Ares, children of the god of war and a nymph named Harmonia. From such a union, war was not just in their blood, it was their nature. Yet even this divine origin is double-edged. Ares stood for rage and bloodlust, but Harmonia meant balance and peace. Together, they made a lineage destined to live between extremes, destroyers and creators, mothers and warriors, life-givers and life-takers. In Greek myth, every encounter with the Amazons carried that contradiction. When Heracles met them, he came seeking a prize. When Theseus met them, he took a queen. When Achilles met them, he fell for the one he killed. No meeting ended without blood or beauty, sometimes both. It was as if the Greeks needed the Amazons to test their own heroes, to remind them that strength meant nothing if it couldn't confront the unknown, the forbidden, the feminine force that refused submission. And so, the legend began to harden into something more than story. The Amazons became symbols of inversion. Where men ruled, they ruled themselves. Where Greece built cities, they built brotherless nations. Where Greek women stayed inside, they rode under open sky. In vase paintings, they gallop beside their horses so seamlessly that artist and viewer both forget where the rider ends and the steed begins. They move as one being, a creature born of muscle, instinct, and motion. Their image unsettled Greece not because it was barbaric, but because it was compelling. If such women existed, what did that mean for the world men had built? What if war, leadership, and courage weren't limited to a single gender? These questions hung over their stories like smoke, never spoken outright, yet impossible to ignore. And so, the poets kept writing. The sculptors kept carving. Every tale pushed them farther into the borderland between myth and memory. Maybe they were ghosts of some real tribe that rode across the northern plains. Maybe they were the echo of stories travelers brought back from Scythia or beyond. Or maybe, as so many myths do, they rose from an ancient ache, the need to imagine a world where power was different, shared, redefined. The Greeks feared them, yes. But fear, in the ancient world, often traveled hand in hand with fascination. To fear something was to admit it mattered. And the Amazons mattered. They haunted the imagination of a civilization that built its identity on the idea of control. These women rode through the cracks of that illusion. They weren't goddesses. They weren't mortals either. They were the boundary itself, crossed, broken, and ridden past. As the mist clears from that first imagined battlefield, you can almost see it now, the shimmer of their armor, the rhythm of their charge, the world of men bending for a moment beneath the thrum of hooves. The Amazons didn't conquer Greece. They didn't have to. They conquered the Greek mind, and that victory was eternal. The Greeks said the Amazons came from the edges of the earth, from lands so distant, so untamed, that they might as well have belonged to another world entirely. Beyond the Aegean, past the Black Sea, where the sun rose over endless steppes of grass and wind, that's where they placed them. To the north lay Scythia, a realm of mounted archers and nomadic tribes, a place that to Greek eyes shimmered between the real and the mythic. Others insisted their home was farther south, in Asia Minor, near the river Thermodon. There, the city of Theseus stood in legend, said to be their capital, a fortress of women who bowed to no king. Every storyteller placed them somewhere different, yet all agreed on one truth. The Amazons came from elsewhere. Their lands were foreign, their customs inverted, their power unsettling. That distance, geographical, cultural, spiritual, made them both credible and impossible. To the Greeks, they were the other side of the mirror, a society ruled not by men, but by queens, not by reasoned councils, but by the will of a single sovereign woman. It was as if beyond the horizon, the rules of the human world flipped over. The myths gave them a lineage worthy of gods. Their father, Ares, the embodiment of war and bloodlust. Their mother, a nymph or a mortal queen named Harmonia, meaning harmony. Together they formed a paradox that defined the Amazons themselves, the union of violence and balance, rage and grace. Out of that divine contradiction came Otrera, the first queen, said to have raised the great temple of Artemis at Ephesus, one of the 7 wonders of the world. It is fitting that a daughter of war would build a shrine to the goddess of the hunt, a woman who roamed the wilderness, free of marriage or submission. In Otrera's story, the Amazons found their genesis, a people born not only of battle but of sacred purpose. The world they built reflected that purpose. No man sat in council, no father passed power to his son. Instead, queens ruled by the strength of their minds and the skill of their hands. They rode into battle beside their warriors, wielding the same weapons, sharing the same scars. Their daughters inherited crowns not through marriage, but through merit. Freedom for them was not a philosophy. It was law. To the Greeks, this was nearly unthinkable. Their cities thrived on hierarchies, on order carved deep into the bones of society. The Amazon myth confronted that order like a mirror turned upside down. Where Athens prized logic, the Amazons lived by instinct. Where Sparta trained men for war, the Amazons made war the work of women. It wasn't chaos to them. It was simply another kind of order, one that the Greeks couldn't accept without rewriting the very definition of civilization. The stories, though, reveal an uneasy admiration beneath the fear. For every line describing the Amazons as barbaric, another praised their discipline, their unity, their courage. To call them monsters was to acknowledge their power. To call them foreign was to admit they existed on the same map. Greek poets painted them in words of awe and contradiction, not as demons, but as reminders of what human will could look like, unrestrained by custom. Archaeologists, centuries later, would find traces that make the myth tremble with truth. In burial mounds across the steppes north of the Black Sea, in lands once ruled by Scythians and Sarmatians, lie the skeletons of women buried with weapons, spears, arrows, daggers, even war horses. Their bones carry the marks of battle, their spines bent from years in the saddle. Many were laid to rest with armor still on their shoulders. It seems the Greeks weren't imagining entirely. Somewhere long ago there truly were women who fought and rode like men, and in the telling their image grew into legend. The Amazons' homeland, then, might not be a single place, but a kind of frontier, a borderland between fact and faith, between what men had seen and what they feared they might see again. The Greeks gave them rivers, temples, and lineages, because myth demanded geography. But the essence of the Amazons, was never a location. It was an idea, a question disguised as a people. What happens when women hold power not as an exception, but as the rule? To that question, Greek myth had many answers, all of them uneasy. The Amazons were fierce, but they were doomed. Noble, but destined to fall. Their victories always ended in tragedy, as if to restore the cosmic balance. The heroes might slay them, but they could never forget them. And so, even in defeat, the Amazons triumphed, not by conquest, but by permanence. They remained, fixed in art and story, their names etched into marble and clay. Their myths were warnings wrapped in admiration, lessons about what could happen when the world's order trembled. Yet the whisper beneath them was always the same. They existed. Somewhere beyond the mountains, beyond the maps, a nation of women rode free. And for the Greeks, that possibility was both terrifying and beautiful. To the Greek imagination, the Amazons were unforgettable not only for their defiance, but for how they looked when they rode into battle. They were not painted as fantasy figures, but as something vividly real. Warriors carved into stone and fired into clay, poised in motion. On black-figured pottery, they appear with short tunics that flare around their thighs, designed not for modesty but for speed. A Phrygian cap curves forward on their heads, soft leather fitted close to the skull, marking them as foreigners from the east. Their shields are not the round hoplon of Greek infantry but slender crescents, built for movement rather than the wall of defense. Every detail spoke of difference. Their armor was light, meant for the saddle. Instead of long spears and heavy bronze, they carried the double-headed axe, the lebris, and the bow, curved and deadly. In art, the bow became their signature, the elegant shape that mirrored their independence, precise, flexible, and lethal from a distance. On horseback, they rained arrows before their enemies could close the gap. Greek soldiers, trained for dense formation and the clang of shields, found themselves facing opponents who struck from nowhere and vanished into dust. To them, the Amazons must have seemed like spirits of the wind, as intangible as they were unstoppable. Even their horses became part of the myth. Artists often blurred the line between woman and mount. Rider and steed moved as one fluid being. In reliefs, their hair streams back in the same direction as the horse's mane, their limbs aligned in symmetry, two halves of a single creature built for speed. The image burned itself into Greek memory, the sound of hooves, the hiss of arrows, the vision of beauty and destruction perfectly balanced. And yet these warriors were never stripped of femininity. The Greeks, though they feared them, could not resist admiring them. On painted vases, their faces are youthful, their bodies athletic, their hair braided with care. They are beautiful, but their beauty is edged with danger. One wrong move, one misplaced word, and that gaze would harden into a bowstring drawn. The artists who painted them seemed to understand something their philosophers denied, that strength and allure were not opposites, but two sides of the same mystery. Their society mirrored their image, agile, ordered, and absolute in its difference. Where the Greeks gathered in assemblies, the Amazons answered to queens. Power flowed not through fathers and sons, but from mothers to daughters. Their rulers were warriors and priestesses, commanders and oracles. Each queen's reign was marked not only by battles but by acts of creation, the founding of cities, the raising of temples, the keeping of sacred rites to Artemis, goddess of the hunt. In their worship, the Amazons found reflection, a deity who roamed wild and refused to be claimed. To Greek storytellers, this world of women was both fascinating and frightening. They imagined a society where men were tolerated only for necessity, to father children, and even then, were kept apart. Some myths say the Amazons crippled or exiled their sons, others that they sent them to neighboring tribes to be raised. These stories tell us more about Greek fear than about Amazonian custom. The very idea of women who did not need men, who could live, fight, and rule alone, struck at the core of Greek identity. It wasn't hatred they projected onto the Amazons, it was anxiety. And yet, in the same breath, They gave them names that shimmered with respect. Hippolyta, whose name means she who lets loose the horses. Antiope, the one who confronts. Penthesilea, mournful might. Marina, queen of countless cities. Otrera, daughter of Ares. Each name carried a story, a reign, a legend, together forming a lineage that rivaled any dynasty of men. To remember one queen was to remember them all. To defeat one was to battle the idea itself. In every portrayal, there is a sense of admiration the Greeks could not suppress. When sculptors carved them into the marble of the Parthenon, they did not shrink them into the background. The Amazons stand eye to eye with their foes, muscles tense, expressions fierce, equal in every measure of strength. Even when shown falling, they fall with grace, not submission. The artists of Athens, perhaps unconsciously, granted them the dignity of worthy opponents. To diminish them would have diminished the heroes who fought them. The Amazons' image, then, was not mere ornament but argument, a silent debate in clay and stone about what power could look like. They were exotic, yes, but not alien, disciplined yet wild, a contradiction that fascinated even those who claimed to destroy them. When Greeks looked upon those painted riders, they saw not only the edge of their world, but the edge of themselves, the line between admiration and fear, order and freedom, control and chaos. To watch the Amazons gallop across the pottery of time is to feel that same tremor still. Theirs was not a rebellion for territory, but for imagination. Every arrow they loosed, every story told about them, was a reminder that the boundaries of civilization were thinner than they seemed, and that beyond them, another kind of strength was waiting. For the Greeks, the Amazons were not just warriors, they were the ultimate test. To face one was to measure your worth not only in battle, but in legend. Their stories became woven into the great tapestry of Greek heroism, not as background figures, but as mirrors held up to men who claimed to be God's chosen. Every hero met them differently, but none left unchanged. The first to meet them was Heracles, the strongest of them all. For his 9th labor he was ordered to steal the war belt, the girdle, of Queen Hippolyta. This was no mere ornament. It was said to be a gift from Ares himself, the god of war, and a symbol of her authority among her people. To take it was to claim dominion over the daughters of Ares, an act of hubris disguised as heroism. When Heracles reached the Amazon city of Theseus, legend divides. In one telling, Hippolyta welcomed him. She admired his strength, his courage, perhaps even saw in him a reflection of herself. She agreed to give him the belt freely, as a gesture of alliance. But Hera, jealous and cruel, whispered lies among the Amazons that Heracles had come to abduct their queen. Rage swept through the camp like wildfire. Bows were strung, horses mounted, and war broke loose. The sky filled with arrows. The ground trembled under hooves. Amid the chaos, Heracles struck down Hippolyta, tore the girdle from her lifeless body, and sailed away with his prize. In some versions, she survived, but her trust in men, and the fragile hope of peace, died there on the banks of Thermodon. Whatever the truth, the story revealed something deeper, that even the mightiest of heroes could not conquer the Amazons without deceit, without divine interference. Their fall was never simple and never clean. Then came Theseus, king of Athens, the slayer of the Minotaur. Another hero who found his destiny intertwined with an Amazon queen. During Heracles' campaign, Theseus encountered Antiope, or perhaps Hippolyta again. The myths disagree. Whether by love or by force, he brought her back to Athens. Some said she followed him willingly, others that she was taken as a captive or trophy. To the Amazons, it was an outrage beyond forgiveness, a queen stolen from her people, a sacred bond broken. They gathered their warriors and marched west, crossing mountains and rivers until they reached the walls of Athens itself. What followed was the Amazonomachy, the great war between Athens and the Amazons, a battle that shook the mythic foundations of Greece. In marble reliefs that still survive, you can see it. Women in short tunics clashing against armored hoplites, axes swinging, horses rearing. Chaos in motion, carved forever into stone. For the Athenians, the Amazon invasion became more than myth. It was allegory. Their city, the embodiment of order and civilization, stood against the wild and the foreign. When Theseus triumphed, poets said that balance had been restored, that the natural order had reasserted itself. But art tells another story. In the frozen moments of those carvings, there is no triumph, only struggle. The Amazons do not cower. They fight face to face, unbroken, and in that defiance they win a different kind of immortality. Even tragedy could not erase them. Antiope's fate changes with each telling. Some say she died defending Athens beside Theseus, torn between loyalty to her people and love for the man who took her. Others say she fell by her sister's hands, a casualty of divided devotion. In every version, her death is a wound that never fully heals, a symbol of what happens when two worlds meet and neither will yield. But it is in the Trojan War that the Amazons achieve their most haunting immortality. When Hector fell and Troy's fate hung by a thread, King Priam called for allies from distant lands. Among those who answered was Penthesilea, queen of the Amazons, a woman said to be as skilled in strategy as in battle. She came not for glory, but for redemption, haunted by guilt for having accidentally killed her sister during a hunt. For her, the battlefield was both penance and release. When she arrived at Troy, the city's despair turned to awe. Warriors who had lost all hope saw her ride through the gates like a storm given flesh. She fought with the fury of a god's daughter, swift, merciless, unstoppable. For a brief moment, the tide of war shifted. The Greeks faltered. Then she met Achilles. Their duel was one of those moments myth remembers as if time itself stopped to watch. Steel against steel, shield against spear. Achilles, the near-immortal hero of Greece, and Penthesilea, the mortal who fought like one. In the end, his blade found its mark. She fell, her helmet rolling away to reveal her face, young, fierce, radiant even in death. And in that instant something broke inside Achilles. The poets say he looked upon her and felt love, or grief, or both. A sudden realization that the enemy he had slain was not a monster, but a mirror. His comrade jeered him for it, and Achilles, enraged, killed the man where he stood. From that moment, the legend of Penthesilea transcended defeat. She became a symbol of tragic equality, the woman who could make the greatest warrior of Greece weep for what he had done. The Greeks may have written of victory, but in truth, every encounter with the Amazons ended the same way. Not in triumph, but in reflection. Heracles, Theseus, Achilles, all proved their might, yet none emerged unscathed. The Amazons tested not their strength, but their certainty. They forced the heroes, and those who told their stories, to face the possibility that courage, leadership, and honor were not the property of men alone. That, perhaps, was their true victory. For while the heroes went home, their names fading into legend, the Amazons remained, riding still through the imagination of those who could not forget them. Over centuries of retelling, the Amazons began to blur, their reality dissolving into symbol, their truth reshaped by fear and fascination. To the Greeks, they remained a paradox that would not rest. Were they living women or living myths? Were they the warning of chaos or the echo of a forgotten civilization? Every era tried to decide, and every era in its way kept them alive. But with time came distortion. One of the most persistent tales claimed that the Amazons cut away one of their breasts to better draw a bow, a grim detail meant to prove their devotion to war. Even the very word Amazon was twisted into Amazos, without a breast. Yet when we look to the art of the time, this image vanishes. On every vase and frieze, they stand whole and strong, balanced in form and in spirit. The story was never about mutilation. It was about exaggeration, a metaphor spun by those who needed to mark them as unnatural. The Greeks invented the wound to make sense of a power they could not understand, a people who fought, ruled, and thrived without needing the structures of men. Other myths claimed they shunned men altogether, keeping only daughters and discarding sons. These were fantasies of inversion, shadows cast by Greek anxiety. In truth, nomadic cultures of the steppe, like the Scythians and Sarmatians, had women who fought beside men, led clans and raised children in the saddle. To Greeks who saw the world in opposites, civilized and barbaric, male and female, order and chaos, such equality felt impossible. So they made it myth. Yet the earth tells a quieter, older story. Archaeologists, digging through the cold soil north of the Black Sea, have found graves of women buried with spears, arrowheads and horses. Their bones bear the scars of battle. Some were teenagers, others mothers. These were not queens in legend, but real riders of the steppe, warriors whose lives crossed the thin line between myth and memory. Their stories traveled south with traders and mercenaries until they reached the ports of Greece, where imagination took over. The Amazons, perhaps, were born from these encounters, truth dressed in the clothing of wonder. The Greeks made them villains, yet never fully. Every depiction carries reverence, an unwilling respect. Even when Athens carved scenes of Amazonomachy into the Parthenon, the marble did not humiliate them. The sculptors gave them the same heroic poise as their enemies. In those frozen struggles, woman against man, horse against horse, there is no clear victor. What stands out instead is equality in motion, the recognition that courage is genderless. To later generations, that image only grew. The Romans retold the stories, folding them into their own conquests. Medieval travelers placed Amazon kingdoms at the far edges of the world, somewhere in Asia or Africa, where maps ended and imagination began. Renaissance painters brought them back to life in oil and gold, draped in armor and light. Each age reshaped them to mirror its desires and its doubts. And then, in the modern age, something extraordinary happened. The Amazons returned, not as myth, but as metaphor. Their legend, once used to warn against inversion, became a banner for strength. In the 20th century, writers and artists reached back through the centuries and found in them something revolutionary. Women who refused to vanish, who claimed their own power long before history was ready to write it down. The most famous of these rebirths came in 1941, when a new kind of Amazon stepped out of myth and into ink, Wonder Woman. She carried the lineage of Theseus into modern myth, her bracelets echoing the shields of her ancestors, her ideals born from the same paradox of compassion and strength. From marble to comic pages, from temple reliefs to film screens, the Amazons have never really died. They adapt, transforming with every storyteller who dares to remember them. Their power no longer lies in their armies or their arrows, but in their endurance, the way their name still stirs something ancient in the human mind. The Greeks saw in them a warning. Today, we see a reflection. Perhaps that is their final victory. The Amazons began as the embodiment of fear, of a world turned upside down, where women ruled and men followed. Yet over millennia, that fear evolved into admiration. They became symbols of resilience, independence, and the unbroken spirit of those who refuse to bow. The boundary they once crossed, between myth and reality, between reverence and dread, is now where they live forever. If you stand before the Parthenon today, you can still see them, carved into the marble that has watched the centuries fade. Warriors frozen mid-charge, spears raised, eyes steady. Stone cannot breathe, yet these figures seem to. The world has changed beyond measure since they were first imagined, but their pulse remains, in art, in story, in every act of defiance that whispers, "Remember us." And as the night folds over those ancient stones, you can almost hear it. The echo of hooves, the rhythm of their march through history. The Amazons, warrior women feared by Greece, never fell. They simply rode beyond the horizon, into eternity,